Today's episode wraps up my conversation with Erik Molvar, the executive director of Western Watersheds Project. We cover a little bit more on wildlife such as bison. We talk about some animal encounters, the beauty of our world, and the awesome conservation work that Western Watersheds Project is doing. And as a hiker, I feel like it's more important now than ever to know what's happening in our world. Starting next week will be the beginning of our Tour de Mont Blanc, or TMB, saga. So stay tuned for that. It'll be a 3-part episode. And we're really excited to share about our tale of hiking the TMB after the Pacific Crest Trail and after our little stretch in Mexico. So you have 3 episodes back to back to look forward to. And we hope you enjoyed that story as well. I'm one of your hosts, Yeti Legs, and you're listening to the Yeti Walks into Base Camp Talking Through Hiking podcast. A show for hikers, backpackers, thru hikers, tree huggers, and anyone who just loves to walk outside. We're a hiking podcast with a goal to make the outdoors more accessible for all of you by telling stories, sharing information, and having folks on that offer advice, gear, and peace of mind. We also like to talk about environmental topics such as this episode you're listening to now and what's happening on our planet. Knowledge is power, and as lovers of the great outdoors, we want all of us to feel a bit more empowered. A huge thanks to Jolly Gear for sponsoring this episode. All right, let's hit the trail. I feel like we could talk for quite a while right now. This is also interesting, and I appreciate you. You're really breaking it down in a way that most folks can understand, and you can still tell that you're passionate about it. You're not just speaking like an emotionless scientist. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm a human being like everyone.
You're a human being, and I appreciate it. Okay. So we're talking about wolves, but there's also something happening with some of our grazers here in North America. Specifically, I'm thinking about, the administration wanting to relocate or possibly even remove quite a lot of bison here in the Midwest. So do you know anything about what's happening with the bison and how they're trying to lease off this land for more cattle grazing?
Absolutely. And you're talking about the American Prairie Project up in north central Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a project that Western Watersheds Project has been an ally of. We're not deeply connected with them, but we have been defending them in court and in administrative appeals for several years now. And now the Trump administration has made a decision to basically argue that having bison for conservation purposes on a federal grazing lease doesn't agree with the Taylor Grazing Act, which they're making that up. There's nothing in the Taylor Grazing Act that says that you can't graze with bison. They're the native grazer. They're the one that's best suited to that landscape. And in fact, the Taylor Grazing Act, in Montana, bison are classified as livestock by the state. And so, there's nothing wrong with that. The Trump administration just arbitrarily decided that they wanted to stymie this effort by the American Prairie Project to buy up grazing leases and ranches and rewild these areas into a more natural ecosystem and a healthier ecosystem because it offended their sensibility that these lands should be used for profit. So they made up a new category called production livestock and said that even though bison are livestock, they're not production livestock because you're not selling them to slaughter and making a profit. Therefore, they don't fit within our grazing lease program. And they're just making that up. And Western Watersheds Project is right now busily writing an administrative appeal of this decision. American Prairie will do their own separate appeal. And then we're going to see the Trump administration in court and we're going to clean their clocks. And we're going to reverse this decision just like we've reversed so many other decisions, because there is absolutely nothing against the law or against any regulation that's out there to have bison and rewild on a livestock grazing permit. And in fact, we should see a lot more of this, because if we had bison out there instead of cattle, Bison will travel far distances away from water and spread their grazing across a wide area of land, whereas cattle, they evolved in the boggy forests of northern Europe. And they're going to look for the wettest, lushest, most productive areas right along the streams. And that happens to be the ecological hotspot for every native species of wildlife. So they're wiping out all the best wildlife habitat and turning that into a mud hole because they will not graze farther than half a mile or a mile from water. They just can't, they don't have the range. And so it's actually a lot better to graze with bison. And you know, the rancher who really proved that was Ted Turner, who just passed away. And he had these massive tens of thousands of acres ranches in places like the Dakotas and Montana and in New Mexico. And he was grazing with bison and he was making a profit. And he had these Ted's American Grill restaurants where he served his bison products, and those were profitable enterprises. And basically what he was doing is he was proving that you could do ranching in a more ecologically responsible way. And along the way, he was reintroducing wolves on his property and being successful. He was reintroducing prairie dogs on his properties where the typical ranchers are wiping them out with poisoning and shooting. And he was bringing back the native ecosystems that would have been here before the arrival of the first white explorers. And it was really not only a fantastic experiment that was very, very successful, but a real teachable lesson that we can all learn from. How we can do things better.
Isn't that a crazy concept? Allowing endemic or native animals that once roamed the countrysides here to be here once again. It kind of resets and makes these ecosystems healthy once again, instead of introducing all these other species that are from different regions and trying to make them work, because they're a profitable commodity for us to, produce and consume.
Well, it's pounding a square peg into a round hole until both the peg and the hole are shattered.
That's exactly what it is.
And across the American West, 89% of the Bureau of Land Management lands in the lower 48 are grazed by cattle or sheep. More than half of the national forest lands are grazed by cattle or sheep. There are a very few areas that aren't grazed by cattle or sheep and could possibly be grazed. And these are called the vacant allotments, the allotments that used to be grazed but were closed because the allotment holder broke federal laws and got kicked off, or there were land health problems that couldn't be solved, or there were wildlife conflicts that needed to be ameliorated, and so they took those cattle or those sheep away. And now the Trump administration is trying to shoehorn cattle and sheep into every single acre of these vacant allotments that have been, in many cases, bought out by conservation groups in order to solve problems like conflicts between cattle and grizzly bears, or between cattle and wolves, or between domestic sheep and bighorn sheep, because domestic sheep carry two diseases, Mannheimia hemolycta and one other disease, that are basically like AIDS for bighorn sheep. And for the domestic sheep, these diseases aren't a problem. They're just carriers. But once you get one nose-to-nose contact between a bighorn and a domestic sheep, and these two species are very curious about each other, and the bighorn rams and the ewes do come and approach herds of domestic sheep and investigate, because they're closely related. They're just, one's a European variety and one is a North American variety. And then those diseases get transmitted and brought back to the bighorn sheep herd, and every single sheep gets it. And their lambs every year can no longer survive, and the herds just die out. It's so bad that when these diseases get transmitted, the state fish and game agencies will go out and proactively kill off all of the bighorn sheep in the affected area, hoping to stop the spread there from those bighorn sheep to other bighorn sheep populations. It's a real tragedy. And there's a simple solution, which is to keep the domestic sheep at least 15 miles away from known bighorn occupied habitat, because 15 miles is the distance that young bighorn rams will foray, it's called, looking to find a band of ewes to start their own harem so that they can breed and carry on their genes into the next generation.
Yeah, you usually don't see bighorns in a field 15 miles away from a mountain range, do you?
Well, you don't usually. They usually stay up in the mountainous habitats. But the problem is that sheep producers are driving their sheep up into the mountain habitats.
Hmm.
One of the big hot issues right now in sheep grazing and the impacts they're having is in the high Uintas wilderness along the Wyoming-Utah border. And in that area, not only do you have bighorn or domestic sheep that have been overgrazing and just wiping out the fragile alpine tundra and turning it into basically a desert, but also you've got bighorn sheep populations up there that have had repeated different disease outbreaks and been wiped out. And then the state game and fish agency reintroduces bighorn sheep, and then they bring the domestic sheep back, and the domestic sheep reinfect that new herd and wipe it out as well. And it's been an ongoing problem. And the solution is an obvious one. It's not like these sheep grazers have any legal right to graze there. It's that the federal government discretionarily, on its own, initiative says, okay, we'll lease it to you and we'll rent it to you. And these are public lands, but you can rent them. Well, all we have to do is stop renting them out, and the problem is solved. It's not like the amount of rent that the taxpayer collects is worth the price of admission. I mean, each one of these cattle calf pairs or 5 sheep is paying $1.61 a month to be on public lands. You can't even feed a hamster that.
Doesn't seem quite worth it, does it?
No. And in fact, the grazing program brings in all across the country about $15 million. And it costs more than twice that much just to pay the salaries and administer the program and collect the rent. It's a losing proposition.
Then what is the drive to convert these lands to just cattle grazing?
I think it is the fact of, the ranchers have been grazing these lands since the 1880s, and they have this unlimited sense of entitlement. And they think that because their father and their grandfather before them grazed these lands with their livestock, that they have the right to do that as well. And in fact, in many cases, these ranchers actually treat the public lands as if they own them. When I lived in Wyoming, which I did for 24 years, if you happen to get in conversation, and it is with a rancher, and it is rude to ask a rancher how many acres that are in his ranch, but sometimes they'll volunteer this. And they might say, well, I have a 30,000 acre ranch, or I have a 50,000 acre ranch. And when they tell you this, they don't have 30 or 50,000 deeded acres that they own and have a title to. They have maybe 2,000 or 3,000 acres that they own, and another 28,000 acres of public land that they have leases on. And they're counting that as their ranch. And in some cases, like there was famously one rancher in the Comanche National Grassland of southeastern Colorado who was posting no trespassing signs on public land, telling the public, you have to get off my land, even though it was a national grassland owned by the federal government and managed by the U.S. Forest Service.
We are a possessive species, aren't we?
Oh, greedy, greedy, greedy.
Oh my gosh. So I'm hearing really good things about the bison being back in their natural habitats. I'm hearing great things about wolves being reintroduced, reintroduced because wolves are and were here before, to their natural habitats here. So I guess I would like to tie all this back in to why should hikers care about all the things that are happening right now?
Well, I think most hikers and backpackers want to be a part of nature. They don't want to be apart from nature.
Yeah.
And that's why we venture out into nature, is to connect with not just the natural world writ large, but ourselves in relation to nature. That is fundamental to being a hiker. I know very few hikers that hike along and just say, I'm going to get my 12 miles, I'm going to get my 18 miles, I'm going to get my 24 miles. They're out there observing the species. They're out there looking at the wildflowers. They're out there learning which ones might be edible, which ones might be poisonous. They're out there, assessing the various wildlife that are out there. These are the ones that are fun to watch. These are the ones that when they're watching you, you might need to take actions to protect yourself and be wise and learn how to handle that encounter with the mountain lion or the grizzly bear, those dangerous species. Some are really interesting, like wolves, which are no threat at all to people. And yet, They have this reputation of the big bad wolf that goes back to European fairy tales that has nothing to do with reality. But, I think, I have been myself out in the Alaskan wilderness, stuck between a full pack of adult wolves and their pups. And I was in between them. Now, if I was in between a grizzly bear and her cubs, I would not be here on this podcast today, because that grizzly bear would have neutralized me in about 3.5 seconds.
Not much you could have done.
Wolves are afraid of people. And so here downhill of me, 35 yards away, are these pitiful howling little wolves howling. And then up here above me, 35 yards away, are the pack. And that was one of the greatest experiences in my outdoor life. And when I was in that position, because I'm a biologist and I knew, and I have a lot of backcountry experience, and I knew what was dangerous and what wasn't, I wasn't quaking in my boots or peeing in my pants. I was turning in 360 degrees so I could memorize every tiny detail of that landscape, so I could have that memory with me for the rest of my life. And I can replay that anytime I choose. And I do it frequently to inspire myself with the relationship that we humans can have with nature. If instead of wanting to kill everything or dominate everything or turn everything into profits, we can just go out there and experience nature on nature's terms and not try and make it on our terms.
Yeah. The Jolly Gear motto is where fun meets functional, and the owner Jolly truly wears that motto on his sleeve. Blending the comfort of a button-down with the sun protection of a sun shirt, Jolly Gear creates tops and dresses from an 84% polyester, 16% spandex blend that dries quickly and offers antimicrobial properties. With color patterns like disco leopard, kaleidoscope, pool party, and trail madness, you can expect only the most epic of double takes when walking by hikers on a trail with your Jolly Gear on. When we hiked the PCT in 2022, we made it to Bernie Falls only to have our sun shirts literally dissolving on our bodies. We reached out to Jolly Gear and he, free of charge, expedited 2 matching Casa orange sun shirts to us in Redding, California. We finished the trail in those shirts and still have them to this day. Marie especially loved the ponytail hole in the back of the hood that allowed for sun protection without discomfort when she wanted to stick a bun or a ponytail through it. You can snag 15% off of your order at jollygear.com by using the code YETI at checkout. That's YETI at checkout to get 15% off of your entire purchase at jollygear.com. Crafted by a thru hiker for anyone who loves to go for a walk outside, check out jollygear.com to outfit your next hike with some high personality sun protection where fun meets functional. Thank you, Jolly, for sponsoring this episode and this podcast. You mentioned seeing the wildlife and the flora and the fauna of these areas that hikers are hiking through, and with both the bison and I don't think we mentioned this, but also the wolves. Both species promote riparian or wetland recovery, and when you have these healthy wetland ecosystems, you mentioned earlier, you see the wildlife come to these areas because healthy watersheds are healthy for all species that live in these habitats. So that's more for people to be exposed to, more for people to see. And also, that's a great water source to pull from if you're out there hiking too, right?
Well, in the arid West, water is life. As Lakota say, mini uchuni. And they're right. It's not just life for us, it's life for all. And, if you can get tuned in to the flow of the water, you will always know where you are, because the drainages will tell you when you've crossed the divide and you're in a new watershed. And, the drainages will tell you where the moose are going to be found, where the best trout fishing is going to be. All the things that are important to you as a wilderness or a backcountry visitor can be learned from the flow of the water and the response of the plants and all the life that comes up from that. Because the Western United States, Zebulon Pike in the 1830s was right when he called it the Great American Desert. It really is. And having lush, wet areas is the exception, not the rule. And that makes these wetter areas, whether they're beaver ponds or whether they're streams or springs, these are the hot spots for all the wildlife.
It really is. Last thing I wanted to ask you about relating to conservation is wolverines. Are you excited about CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, reintroducing wolverines?
I think it's going to be a great addition to Colorado. I think wolverines are a species that require wilderness more than any other species. They are so reclusive and they are at such low population levels, even in the areas like the Yukon or northern British Columbia, where they're relatively undisturbed. They are at very low population densities. So they're very, very rare. And it's great to be able to see them coming back to Colorado. There were a handful of wolverines in Colorado in the early 2000s, but they probably were escapees from Marty Stauffer's Wild America documentary and not really a natural phenomenon. And it will be great to see an effort to bring that species back as well.
Definitely. For y'all listening, wolverines are basically like small to medium sized weasel bears, if you can imagine that. And they have been known to take down full sized moose that get caught in snowpack. So when you want to think about a badass animal, think about the wolverines. Speaking of badass, Eric, I think you are goals for me. If I can somehow become a sliver of the person that you are and know just a percentage of what you know, like I have done something good with my life. So thank you for sharing almost an hour of your time and all this information that you've gathered over your lifetime.
Well, thanks for having me on this podcast. And it's been a pleasure talking to you and sharing some of these stories.
Of course. In a wrapping note here, what is a bit of advice you would like to give to folks listening? Because you deal with a lot of negativity, but you clearly have a very positive attitude towards this.
Well, I would say love where you live and fight for what you love. Learn your public lands, learn what's going on, get engaged, start getting in touch with your local members of Congress, start getting in touch with your local federal agency folks, and make sure that your interests are heard. Because the profit-driven industries, the big corporations, they have paid lobbyists in DC 24 hours a day, pounding those halls of Congress all the time. And if these congressional representatives don't hear from their own constituents, from their own districts, they're just going to go with what these industry lobbyists fill their ear full.
It's true. Eric, thanks again. In my mind, you're the modern day Steve Irwin. So thanks again for being on the show. And everyone, thanks for listening and learning a little bit more about what's happening in our country, what's happening in our world. Like I like to say, knowledge is power. And I think we should all, as lovers of the great outdoors, be a bit more knowledgeable and therefore empowered. Thanks to the Fire Went Sloss for our intro and our outro music. We appreciate you, Anders, always letting us use that. And most of all, we appreciate you, the listener. We wouldn't be here without you, and we just appreciate the time that you give towards our show and educating yourself when and where you can. And if you're Eric, you're probably out doing 10,000 miles over your lifetime, logging and writing guidebooks for all these things, but you don't have to be. You can be hiking your own little footpath around your house or your neighborhood, or you can be going out and doing your own through hike. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what trail you're on, because we're all just outside walking. Just wanted to let you know that here at our show, Yeti Walks into Base Camp, we don't use AI for anything. AI has detrimental impacts on our environment, and we just don't want any part of it. So just know that when you're listening to our episodes, each one is hand edited by our team with talent and integrity. Thanks for listening.